Good afternoon to you, where we start with the story around the Matric exams, a full-scale probe now underway into who's been leaking Matric papers. The second paper of the 2020 Matric exams, Physical Science 2, has now been found to have been shared before learners wrote it. This comes after the Maths paper 2 leaked last week. Former MEC for Education in Gauteng, she's an education expert at the University of Johannesburg, Mary Metcalfe, joins us now. Mary, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. This is a terrible thing to happen to our matrics. It may mean they actually have to write this again.
Well, it may mean that learners will need to write it again. What Umalusi and the DBE have to do first is to make an assessment of the extent of the areas affected by the leakage. Sometimes the sharing of a stolen exam paper is limited to a particular geographical area. And if the combination of the examination of the exam results, the study of the exam results, as well as the intelligence information that's obtained by the security personnel, if it's a small area, it would only be schools in that area that would need to rewrite. If it's more pervasive, in order to protect the integrity of the exams, then everybody would need to rewrite, which is not what our learners need this year.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the most terrible year. I mean, these papers are kept under tight security. I mean, very tight security. Does this happen often?
It doesn't happen often. The security arrangements are incredibly careful. I'm not in touch with the current security arrangements, but I remember in Gauteng in the early years, we actually had to weigh each pack as it was packed, as it came out of the printer, so that before it was packed, there was a check to see if there was one piece of paper missing. So the security goes into the printing, security into the packing, security into the distribution, and then the distribution is to every high school in the country. So there's multiple steps, all requiring very high levels of security.
It's quite incredible that you're able to weigh them. I mean, the other thing is that, as I understand it, the papers now are kept at district offices until the early morning, 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. They get distributed to the schools. Now, if that's the case, it means really one of two things. Either it's actually education department officials in the district offices who are leaking them, or if they are leaked by teachers, it would only be an hour or two before matrics actually write the exam.
Yeah. So every morning, and I think we have to take our hats off to the officials who work so hard during the entire exam period, delivering to schools. So it's somewhere between the printing, the packing, and the distribution, where somebody unscrupulously, or more than one persons, have got hold of a paper and then leaked it. It's only this hawk type investigation that's going to help us know where it was leaked, as well as the intelligence that comes from the ground. Because the only reason we know about these leaked papers is because people have reported it. The more people report, the more it will help to create a network of evidence and understanding of where the source may be.
I mean, it's amazing. When I wrote Matric, I mean, no one had a cell phone. They weren't even available in South Africa at the time. In the last 5 years, I would suggest the one difference is that WhatsApp, in particular WhatsApp, has become pervasive. Everybody has it. Everyone has a phone with a camera and the ability to display images. So what I'm saying is that now an image, even a PDF of an exam, could move from Cape Town to Messina in about 10 minutes. I mean, that could be the difference now.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, I think you're right. I hadn't myself thought about how easy it is to distribute with WhatsApp, but it does completely change the security arrangements. Depending on when the leakage happened, learners may or may not have had enough time to amend their preparation. I'm sure for many learners, I suspect for learners who had sight of the paper and didn't have time to actually amend their preparation, it might even have just caused greater panic. But Yes, WhatsApp may be a factor, and I think I look forward to seeing what the Hawks and the DBE and Umalusi are able to show as the investigations proceed.
It's interesting to me, and maybe I'm reading too much into the subjects that this has happened to. So it's maths paper 2 and physical science paper 2. Now, both maths and science, I remember in Matric, were very, very difficult subjects. They were seen as tough. Whether they actually are or not, I realize is a much bigger debate. Journalism was much easier than both of those. Could there be pressure on those subjects and on people's results in those subjects that leads to more pressure for a leak? And what I'm saying is, that someone who's maybe doing this for financial gain can get more for a maths paper than they could say for an English paper or something like that. Could there be a reason why it's these two papers?
Yeah, it's an interesting angle. Both maths and physical science are subjects that only a smaller proportion of the subjects write because they are high stakes gateway subjects. Many courses at post-secondary level require maths and science, physical science, in order to be admitted. So they may have greater currency, and it may be why those two subjects are the ones that we are aware of at the moment, that there has been a leakage. I'm hoping that the DBE and Umalusi, together with the Hawks, will be able to establish if there's been leakage in other subjects as well. And that will only be apparent as time goes on. But once you have a leak, then you know that your system is not as secure as you hoped, and you have to be vigilant for other possible leaks.
I think the presumption when you have a leak like this is that there'll be a learner, 17, 18, 19 years old, gets a copy of it, looks at it on a phone, looks at it on a friend's phone, and the idea is that that person will automatically do better in the exam because they've seen it. Maybe it just got their brain working. But I wonder if it may actually be more complex than that. I think, firstly, matric exams, for various reasons, there's a lot of stress already. It's an emotional time, this year in particular. And for some learners, this may be counterintuitive. It actually may go the other way. They might actually be so distressed at having seen the exam and then seeing the same questions or the same exam now in front of them and they're writing it, in a very much a moral quandary, not sure what to do, not sure who to tell, not sure if they should put their hand up in the exam and say, I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm sorry, sir, but I've seen this before and there's a problem. And that actually may mean that someone who's seen the exam, already pent up with all of this stress, doesn't do as well as if they hadn't seen the exam.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's multiple ways in which participating in this activity can actually undermine. It can make you more panicky because now you wished you had time to go to your textbook and you wanted to look and you couldn't, whereas if you hadn't seen it, you would calmly focus on the problem before you. I agree with you that many learners might be sitting in the exam knowing that they've seen something that they shouldn't, which may become something for which they get into trouble that undermines their very passing of the exam. And maybe there would be learners who are aware that something's going on that they haven't had access to. So it is an unfairness and a destabilization in multiple ways.
In the end, this is about the behavior of the adults. It's adults who would have leaked this.
Absolutely. It would only have been adults who've had access. There is somebody along the whole chain, somewhere in the country, because this chain gets more and more diverse as it spreads to the ground, who saw an opportunity, who then did this incredibly immoral thing of subverting the whole process of the grade 12 2020 exams at a time where grade 12s need our support and understanding, not destabilization.
So the department will do the investigation, obviously very important. Is there anything else they should be doing at this stage? I mean, I can just imagine this. I mean, I can imagine the parent of a learner who maybe doesn't do very well being incredibly frustrated and thinking, did their friends have access to the exam and my child didn't? Or, my child was destabilized by having seen the exam and put in this difficult position. Or my son or my daughter is not behaving as I thought they would. They haven't, when I asked how the paper was, they haven't done the normal thing what a teenager does and says it was fine. They're actually upset by something. And now I just don't know where I am.
There's several steps. I think firstly, It's to get the processes underway of ascertaining the extent of the leak. It's about finding the culprits. It's about, during the marking process, seeing if there are inconsistencies in the results. In one school, for example, if you have a selection of students doing exceptionally well relative to their school-based assessment, alarm bells should ring. If an entire school does very much better than it has in previous years without a sensible explanation, alarm bells should be ringing. So firstly, mark, assess what we can get in terms of information from the ground and through intelligence networks about how wide the leakage is. Look at how the marks are inconsistent. Tie that in with the investigations. At some point, the department will have to decide how many learners do need to rewrite. If we're very lucky, it's very localized. It's 3 high schools. Those 3 high schools will rewrite. But that decision can only be taken when all of the investigations have been completed and when Umalusi and the DBE have looked at the pattern of performance. Hopefully, it won't affect all of the learners. It's very stressful to write these high-stakes exams, and I'm hoping that the learners will have written successfully, and only the affected geographical areas and schools. But as you say, with WhatsApp, it makes it much more complicated. Well, let's say with IT sharing of data and images and PDFs, it's much more complicated.
Mary Metcalfe, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. A research associate expert on education at the University of Johannesburg. All right, plenty coming up. We're expecting developments around Brackenfell High and the South African Human Rights Commission investigation into the situation there. Also, of course, the launch today of the 16 Days campaign of activism against violence against women. Stay with us.